Hi, friends and family,
Welcome to Hope After Addiction
with your hosts, Katie Comer.
and Chelsea McLeod.
Welcome to Hope After Addiction. We are so happy that you joined us this week. How are you?
Well, how are you?
I'm good. Just in the middle of summer, and I just dropped my kids off at camp.
Farm camp.
Yeah.
I love that.
I know. It's
Yeah.
been fun. So this is their second day that I dropped them off. But yesterday when I picked them up, they were like, Mom, we milked the cows and it could have kicked us in the head and killed us. And I was like,
Awesome.
well, it's a good day. It's a good day.
Glad you're here.
But then they said they fed calves with the bottle.
It's the
I mean,
sweetest
it's
thing.
just like so fun. I wanted to do something different other than just like sports camp, because we are also doing that for Eli and gymnastics camp for her.
Fun.
But I wanted to do something like that got them out of their comfort zone a little bit, because they're not used to the farm life.
No, and those are life skills.
Yeah.
You never know when you may need
You
to
never
milk a
know when you
cow.
need to know how to milk a cow. I think Eli said Ella was the first one that volunteered to do it, which I don't know. I don't know why it surprises me, because I feel like she is adventurous, but I would have for sure thought it was Eli that would have volunteered to go first.
So funny.
He's like, I'm going to let you go first on that.
I don't want to be kicked in the head.
But she said that
love
it was
that.
good. I don't know if she got anything, but I feel like that's kind of hard to do. Have you milked a cow?
No, I have fed one with a bottle, and it was so precious.
Was it?
Yeah, John, we get our milk from the Amish, and he
Yeah,
goes
that's
over
right.
there, and they milk it, like, right there. And
Really?
Oh, yeah, and he'll come, and it'll
Oh.
be, that much fat at the top. And I'm like, but I'm not a milk person. I don't like milk.
Oh, so what do you do to be able to drink it? Does it just
He
settle?
likes fatty milk. Yeah.
Oh. it
Yeah,
just
but
settles?
usually skim it off the top. But
I feel like I'm going to throw up.
me too. Yeah, I
What?
don't do, like, I can do.
What?
I'll do almond milk, but I'm not a milk person.
I do
But
watery milk, because I do like,
skim.
well, it's 2%. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's like watery.
Yeah. John likes the thicker the better.
Really?
Yes.
That's wild. Did you just drink it like straight out of the cup?
Mhm. Oh, yeah.
Is it like buttermilk? My
Kind of. I
grandparents
mean, it's
used to
pretty thick.
love-
I don't think it has that flavor, but the cows do take on the flavor of, like he was telling me with our good Amish friend, if you milk at night, they'll have the flavor of what they've eaten all day. So like one of
Weird.
them that he got had all the onions in it because the cows had been eating onions in the
What?
pasture the day. So that wasn't his favorite batch of milk, but it's so cool. Him and Jasper will go over there and they'll watch him milk the cows, and
That's wild.
it's wild. But I'm like you, I'm not a milk person, so I just
Yeah.
get a
Well,
little
that is
nauseous to my stomach.
a little bit, a lot.
But it's
A little
such
bit a
good
lot.
lessons. I know. But like being able to milk a cow or
I know.
bottle feed a cow is so
Yeah,
sweet.
that's fun. So yeah, they're having fun.
Yeah.
They're having a good time. They're having water day today. So
Ooh.
anyway, enough
love
about
that.
us and our life. What's going on? We are going to be talking. I was just telling her, she brought up the topic, and I said, that sounds interesting, but I have no idea where this is going. So we have some points, but we're interested to kind of see where
It'd be interesting.
the Holy Spirit leads us in this. But we're
Yeah.
talking about being unoffendable.
Like an offensive spirit. Like
Yeah.
there's you know people.
Yeah.
Everything offends them.
Yeah.
But I feel like as loved ones walking through
Addiction.
this,
Yeah.
it is very easy for us to attach to that spirit because we have been so hurt,
We have been.
betrayed, lied to, walked all over, abused. And so I think it's important to talk about because you can get in that place and not realize how bad it's really gotten.
Yeah. Yeah, I have I'm hoping that at the end of this podcast that you have some tools, I guess is what I would
Yep.
say, to help you to not be so offended by everything that's happened. Because inevitably we have that spirit of you're not going to trust them ever again.
Yeah.
Whatever they do, you have a lot of resentment. And so naturally, I think that taking offense to a bunch of stuff is just in our spirit when we're walking through this season. And so maybe some tools that you can walk away from this podcast saying, okay, I have these steps that can help me be the better version of myself when I'm walking with my loved one who's going through addiction or right out of rehab or going into rehab. So,
Yeah, and
some
it's not talked about much, you know.
Yeah.
And I told Katie I'd done a couple of Bible studies on this, and it was so powerful.
Okay.
Yeah, it was really neat. But the KJV, the word offended is mentioned 25 times.
Really?
So I was like, well, I guess it is something that God would like us to talk about, you know, and discuss and have the knowledge of. But I looked up the definition, and it said feeling or expressing hurt, indignation, or irritation because of a perceived wrong or insult. And I go back to the word perceived. In
Yeah,
there.
that's what stuck out to me too.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
Well, because how many times, especially walking through addiction or coming into recovery, whatever that looks like, we read into everything. We look into everything. We hang on every word. So a lot of the things that can offend us are a perceived notion, not necessarily a fact. So I go back to like fact or feeling. Is this fact or is this feeling? And it's easy for us to run on with a perceived notion instead of a factual thing. And then it causes so much turmoil in our relationships that we're trying to heal. So I thought that was the word perceived, and that was pretty strong. Because it causes division. Any spirit of offense causes division.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what the enemy wants in our stories, in your story, in any form of restoration or redemption. He wants division.
Yeah.
And this is the first little sly way that it happens.
Yeah. Well, so it's great to know the definition of that and stuff, but how do we not be offended?
Yeah.
So what are some steps that our listeners can take, or what have we done personally to be unoffendable? Like, because I was trying to think back to my life, because I love when our listeners can walk away with stuff saying like practical things that they can do, XYZ that they can do to be a better version of themselves or whatever that may be. So in this case is being unoffendable. So I was like thinking through my life and what I did, and we've gone through some of this stuff. When I put some of these things down, I was like, okay, we've talked about these a lot. So some of this is repetitive, but it's just such good reminders. But you might have some different ones than me. Hopefully, I mean that's the goal, because we don't talk about this stuff. So before we talk, but so what are some things that we can do? I'll start out. That we can do to not be so offended. And I think that one of them is setting the boundaries with your loved one, whether they're going into rehab, specifically when they're coming out of rehab and they're getting back into the routine of your daily life, because that's when you see them the most. That's when you're going to get offended the most. That's when you're going to resent them the most. It's when all of these feelings come up is when they get out of rehab and starting their life again. So setting those boundaries with your loved one, so that way they know what to expect, which you know what to expect. Nothing's a surprise. If you're going to have, your finances, setting that boundary with your finances so that they don't get offended. So that you don't get offended by them going to do something that you didn't realize. Curfews, setting boundaries with that. There's lots of boundaries that you can set that, so there's an expectation, so it helps with being offended.
Yeah. And that's a huge one, because one of the things I had written on my notes is the main reason people live offended is unfulfilled expectations, whether they are unspoken, unmet, or even unrealistic, and in our case, triggers. So Katie, what she said, all of these things, these boundaries, but if they don't know them and they go and do them, we're offended, but we've never laid those out for them to even know what our expectations are.
You can't read your mind.
Yeah, we can't. And we know that that's hard. We know that that is super uncomfortable to put a contract down or expectations or, hey, these are the rules for us to walk forward. But that is where an offensive spirit comes in, because it's never talked about. And there's unrealistic, unmet expectations.
Yeah.
And so that's one great way to just hamper down on that.
Yeah.
Because it's all out in the air.
And I've talked about our contract that we had before when Adam first got out of rehab, or when I moved here. I quite literally had a contract that he had to sign. And it sounds ridiculous because he was a 30-year-old man.
I know,
But I mean, I was like, I got to do this for me.
Mm-hmm.
So that way that I can start building the trust. I'm not
Yeah.
saying that these points are going to be here forever
Mm-hmm.
in our life. And thank goodness they're not.
Yeah.
But I mean, go back and listen to, I don't remember which one. It was probably one of our very first ones, but I specifically had, you have
Yeah.
it?
No,
Oh.
I was getting a pen.
Oh, okay.
Mark something.
I mean, quite literally had bullet points that he was like, you've got to, I'm going to give you a cash only basis and you have to show me every receipt.
Yep.
And it sounds ridiculous from a 30-year-old man, but then I told him, I said, this is not going to be around forever. I've got to build this trust. And then, we stopped doing cash only. He got put back on our accounts again. And then he was able to use the credit card. He still had to use receipts. Yeah. But then now he's over our finances.
Right.
So
never in a million years did Katie and I think that would be
so
the
it's
case.
like not a part of our life anymore. But it took a minute. It took a long time.
Yeah. And that's necessary. And it's pre-communication. I think that's one of the communication episodes we did. But to communicate that before they come home, too. Yeah. So that those offensive spirits don't rise up. Because you'll both get them if it's not communicated.
Right, yeah. Because they will, too. They'll get offended. And, that's something that they teach at S2L, our sister ministry. They teach that you have lost their trust. You have offended them in ways. You've got to give them time to heal and time to process. And they talk a lot about that. But you've got to do your due diligence too. And so if it's writing this contract out, setting these boundaries up, so that way you both know the expectations that are being met. Yeah.
It's so good. One of the things in one of these Bible studies that I did that knocked me off my feet in conviction, but an offended spirit is actually a self-righteous spirit. And if you think about it, it is. And we've been so jaded by humans or hurt by humans, and I struggled with this a lot. I came to expect it. I came to expect the rug to be ripped out from under me. And so I would oftentimes go ahead and make up scenarios in my offensive spirit that would lay out the groundwork for what wasn't even happening. And that's a hard one. So I think sometimes you have to ask, am I trying to prove a point to how bad you've hurt me? Mm-hmm. Is this why I'm offended right now? Because I want you to know how bad you've hurt me. And so a lot of times one of the other tools is grace. Mm-hmm. Grace. Mm-hmm. And I had to turn that back on me. I remember we lived in Savannah. I was driving to work one morning, and this car, I had done nothing wrong. I went over this 1,000 times because I was so just confused and offended at first. But I had done nothing wrong when I was driving, and this car just comes around me, is honking, is flicking me off, is cussing me out, and I'm like, what have I done? What did I just do? I don't understand. But what I heard is this has nothing to do with you this morning. This hasn't, whatever they have gone through this morning is on them. And so this goes back to even outside of that other stuff that Katie just talked about is we are all separate human beings made by God. We have different backgrounds. We have different upbringings. We have different personality types. We have different traumas. And so where grace comes in, and I still do this today, even if John's being snippy or if he's, anything else, and I have to go back to grace because I don't know what he's walking through in that moment until he decides to share. And so it goes back to me. I have moments that I'm not the kindest person and I'm not the most pleasant person to deal with. And so I think grace is so forefront to an offensive spirit, to fighting that. And it's you don't know what they're walking through. I had a client talk about it yesterday, and we don't know what people are walking through. And so in that moment, if they become snippy or if they say something that's not kind or whatever it may be, to choose to grace the way that we've been graced instead of bouncing back with an offensive spirit and ready to fight. John says a lot of times, are you going to die in that ditch? So you have a choice. Do I want to die in that ditch and fight this battle? Or do I want to grace and step up and be the bigger person and forgive and walk on and not sit in it?
That's a little bit of another point of mine, is to have a little bit, I know it's hard, but empathy and understanding that you don't know what they are going through. And realizing, and it'll take a little bit of the offensive out of it for you if you realize, like what Chelsea said, this has nothing to do with you and everything to do with Satan's attack on your loved one. This is a battle that has been going on for years and years and years. Satan thinks that he can win, and then he never does. And so he continually attacks people, and certain people it's through addiction. And because he knows their weakness, tempts them, and it has quite literally nothing to do with you. And so when you take that out of the equation, saying, okay, this is not a personal attack on me. If you're a mama, it is not how you raised your son or daughter. It is not a personal attack on how you parented them. If you're a wife who is struggling because your husband is off the rails, it is not because you have not loved your husband enough. It is nothing to do with that. So you cannot take offense to their behavior, but it is everything to do with the battle between them, Satan, and God. And God will win.
Yep.
And he always does. And you can hold on to that. We talk a lot about God winning over addiction, and he has done that in our husband's life. And so find hope and peace in that God will win that battle, and hopefully that way for you. But we do know that there are listeners out there whose loved one did pass away because they lost the battle to addiction. But let it be known that God will win the final battle.
Yep.
It is not because, we talked a little bit about this in a previous podcast, but there was not an end to that. God is going to win, whether it be through your loved one's story, even though they lost the battle of addiction, or through you telling it. And so he will win one way or the other.
Yep.
All right. So if you look at being offended, in perspective to addiction, it is not your fault. So that kind of takes that away.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, and that's powerful. And like this podcast goes both ways. This podcast goes for the one struggling in addiction, because I know we have a lot of couples that'll actually watch together, because the one struggling can also get very offensive. Like, she doesn't trust me. He won't let me like have the money, all the things. They can become very offended as well. And so this podcast does go both ways, because it's easy for both of us, but God is in the storm. And if we could only see the battle, like Katie said, being fought around us of, it's not my husband I'm fighting right now. It's not my wife I'm fighting. It's actually the enemy. Yeah. And I think one of the things is it's a choice to be unoffendable. And if we choose to believe and know how fragile people are, there's so much grace that abounds in that. And I know a lot of my prayers for many, many years over John, in these moments that were very offensive, I said, God, let me see what you see in him right now. Give me your eyes so that I can see what he's struggling with, or I can see from his point of view. Because so many times I'm like, that is crazy. That is not rational. That is just stupid. You know, like that's what I wanted to say. Dumb. You are dumb. But when God gave me the eyes to see even the little boy in him that was struggling with something, grace abounded. And I saw how fragile he was. And so this is not a battle that you can fight on your own, like without a shadow of a doubt. So when we pray that, like, let me see what my son or daughter is struggling with right now. Let me see what my husband or wife are actually dealing with. Because we see from our perspective. We don't see from their perspective. And so once we ask for that from God, like, he will show you that to where you're like, oh, I mean, God's knocked me on my fanny many a times. Because I'm like, oh, that hurt. Like, I see now. And I empathize with John's heart right now. And so he's given me that ability to grace him in those times. Yeah. So another one, learn to give the benefit of the doubt. I think, like I said earlier, so many times when we've been so jaded, we jump to the worst case scenario. We jump to they are out to hurt us. We jump to the worst thing that could happen. And so when we learn to give the benefit of the doubt, there is so much freedom. Bless you. Thank you. There is so much freedom in giving people the benefit of the doubt, because it's not against us, you know?
Yeah. I also talk a lot about another way to be unoffendable or help that process when you're walking through this. Is we talk a lot about it, but it's really focusing on yourself and not so much your loved one.
Yep.
Because when you're so focused and hyper focused on them, and if they're doing good, if they're relapsing, or are they, this is a trigger for me, you're so focused on it. I mean, inevitably you're going to be offended by something, right? And so one of the things is really self-care, and there are so many different ways to practice self-care, which will in turn give you that heart of compassion towards your loved one, because you're not so focused on them, because you focused on yourself. You got to be a little selfish during the season of them healing. You've got to heal yourself, and we talk a lot about it. There's so much benefit in to just focusing on yourself, whether that's through your own counseling, not just couples counseling, which I think is beneficial, but your counseling, you going in and talking about your feelings with a Christian counselor, going to get your hair done, going to get your nails done, taking a shower, which sounds ridiculous, but you would be surprised at the amount of, you hear it a lot in new moms. Yeah. And those very first, you're so focused on your baby and making sure they're fed and they're good that you kind of forget about yourself. And those first few weeks are so hard, right? You remember. You'll see it again.
I need this reminder in a couple weeks.
I'll remind you. Go take a shower, baby.
Yes.
You need
Go for a walk. Yeah.
Go for a walk. Go, go pick some flowers. Go do something for yourself that brings you joy, so you're not so focused on being offended, right? Or so focused on what they've done or they haven't done for you and your loved ones. So
yeah, that's one of my greatest points on mine too. Matthew 7:3, but focus on the log in your own eye. Yeah. And I think that has been one of my greatest lessons in this season, walking through what we have, is focus on me. Because if you quit focusing on you and focus on them, this offensive spirit will run rampant. Yeah. And when you're able to focus back on you, whether it be self-care, whether it be the realization that I'm a broken human too, it literally just crushes all of it. I mean, immediately, I had a moment this morning. I was like, will you do that too? When I wanted to point the blame at him, and it's crazy how God will just stomp it out as soon as you focus back on your log.
He's like, but take a look at yourself.
Yeah. And quickly he was like, nope. Yeah. And what if we had that childlike faith? What if we could go back to childhood, have that faith to not think that everybody's out to hurt us and get us? Like, how joyful would our life be?
Yeah.
So that's what I got.
What else? Anything else?
I think that's about it.
Well, we realize that this whole world of addiction and walking through it with your loved one is super complicated. We are not saying that it is easy. But we do know that there's practical ways that you can help this process with your loved one so that you're not so balled up, tight, and taking offense to everything and lashing out at them. We realize that it's complicated, and we realize that it's not easy, and we realize you're going to get offended. But these are just maybe some tools to kind of help you walk this journey so that you are a better version of yourself for your loved one and for you, so that you're not so wound up, so tight, and so that you're not taking offense, trying to be a little bit unoffendable. And we hope that you found some encouragement today and some steps that you can take in your own life that's helped us in our past and continually helping us even in our futures, so that we can just be a better version of ourselves for us, for our Lord and Savior, and for our loved one. And so again, we hope you felt encouraged today. If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you give us a like and a subscribe so you can see our next podcast for next week. If you're seeing this on any of our social media platforms, Hope After Addiction, make sure you give us a like and share us. We hope that you have a great day, and we'll talk to you next week. Be blessed.